You ready? Okay. We'll return back to Genesis chapter 5. We'll pick up where we left off last time in our study here, first 11 books of Genesis. So let me get turned on here and we'll get started. And the kind of focus of the time period we're going to look at is before the flood. Last time, remember, we talked about Enoch a little bit, some of the things he said and some of the things he did, and that, as it says, he walked with God, and God took him off the earth, translated him off the earth alive. We don't exactly know why. We talked about the possibility that Enoch could be one of the two end-time witnesses that we find mentioned in Revelation chapter 11. One of the two prophesied prophets that will come along and begin to call out the believing remnant of Israel, and they will preach the message, repentance, because the day of judgment is at hand. Once again, that will happen in the future. So, don't know whether he was or not, but his message, as recorded in the book of Jude, kind of points that direction, because it was a message of repentance, because judgment was coming. This is also, as we talked about last week, the reason why these men, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah, they knew judgment was coming. It was no secret, because Enoch had been preaching that during his day. So let's get into our scriptures and we'll take a look here. Older than Methuselah. Have you ever heard that expression? We've all heard that expression. Well, there's a reason why. Because Methuselah is the oldest recorded living person that we have in the Bible. There may be other, accounts in other places. In fact, I think there are some Babylonian accounts of people living to great age and so forth. So the Bible is not the only ancient record that mentions people living to great ages. Methuselah lived 187 years and begat Lamech. And Methuselah lived after he begat Lamech 782 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. So he's the oldest recorded person we have in the Bible. And Lamech lived 182 years and begat a son. And he called his name Noah, saying, "This same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord hath cursed." And Lamech lived after he begat Noah 595 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. Now, some of the number people may be able to take that Lamech's life, 777 years, and kind of make some numerical significance out of it. And there may be. If there is, I don't know what it is. But anyway, it's interesting that that's how long he lived. Lamech apparently died shortly before the flood. But apparently he did not die in the flood. Okay, let's think about this statement Lamech made when Noah was born. It says he called his name Noah, saying, "This same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord had cursed." Now, this is one of those verses that always kind of intrigued me, and I've always wondered, why did he say this? Well, I'm going to give you some reasons why I think he said it. You may have some other reasons. But one of the things is that I believe he made this statement about his son Noah was because, number one, they knew about the coming judgment. And they knew this from Enoch's prophecy. He had said, as we find recorded in Jude, "Behold, the Lord is coming with 10,000 of his saints to execute judgment upon the ungodly, for all their ungodly speeches which they said, and ungodly this and that." So they knew that judgment was coming. And Enoch probably wasn't the only one that was preaching that message, because all of the men mentioned, if you ever wondered, okay, there were other sons and daughters born, why were these ones mentioned that were mentioned? Seth and Enos and Jared and Mahalalel and Enoch and Methuselah and Lamech and Noah down the line. Well, it's because not only were these like the firstborn sons in the line, but these men were also prophets. Adam, and a lot of times we don't think about this, Adam was a prophet. He was God's representative. Even though he messed up, he was still God's representative. And Adam was a prophet. That passed down, would have passed down to Abel. Or actually, should have passed down to Cain. But we know the whole story with Cain. He, kind of like Esau, he despised his birthright and so forth. And so, went his own way, and went the devil's way, actually. So Seth received that prophetic office, that blessing from Adam, and he passed it down to his son Enos, and he passed it down to whichever one sons his was. And it came all the way down through Enoch, and then Methuselah, Lamech, to Noah. And then from Noah it went to Shem. And Shem went to probably Arphaxad, I think, and then on down the line. So there was an unbroken line from Adam all the way through these men, all the way down to Abraham and Isaac, Jacob, and then his 12 sons, and so forth. So they knew about the coming judgment, probably even before Enoch, but he was apparently special. Set apart one, he walked with God and so forth, which we talked about. That walking with God is significant because it shows God as possessor of heaven and earth. Walking up and down in the land shows possession. So they knew about that. They knew that the judgment was connected to the earth, to the land. They knew this because they knew God had cursed the ground, and they knew why. So they knew that the coming judgment was going to have something to do with the earth itself, with the land. Lamech spoke this as a prophetic blessing over his son. Remember that just as the office of prophet, at least in that day, it's not a hard and fast rule of thumb, because the office of prophet was not always passed down from father to son. But in this day it was. Before the flood it was. Also, the blessings were passed from father to son. And this is one of those kind of an eternal principle of blessings being passed down from father to son. And really, even this is a kind of a universal principle that doesn't just apply to Israel. Israel had certain blessings promised to them if they kept the law. If they didn't keep the law, cursings. If they kept the law, blessings. Now, but outside of that principle, there's like the principle of father to son blessings being passed down. And I think that that's something to our detriment we've lost in our culture. And somewhere down the line we lost that, and it's been, I don't know, maybe centuries ago in our culture of fathers physically speaking blessings over their son and so forth, or we know the concept of fathers actually physically being a blessing to their son. But back in these ancient times they would speak these blessings over their son, and being prophets, they believed by faith that what they spoke would come to pass. So, Lamech made this statement largely because as a prophet, he spoke this blessing over Noah, that when the judgment came, the righteousness would, show up in Noah, that God's mercy would come through Noah, and that somehow redemption would come through Noah. That's why he said this, and so forth, believing that once judgment came, that the curse would be removed from the ground, and so forth. So, kind of some reasons why that happened. Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And we'll look at this a little bit more as we go on in upcoming chapters. The specific groups of people that descended from these three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Probably all of us in here we're descendants of Japheth. That's where the, Caucasian races, I guess you could say, kind of European races came from, Japheth. Now, I've got a real interesting book somewhere, if I can find it, the title of the book is, the 16 Patriarch, something, I can't remember the name, but I'll look for that and see if I can find it. I've got to, because I need the information out of it here in a couple of chapters. But anyway, Noah's 500 years old. He's got his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So, they apparently helped him probably build the ark, and they were instrumental in all that as it went on. Now, we get into Genesis chapter 6. And we're going into a section here that is a matter of great debate. And I'm gonna say this before we even read the verses, before we get into this. I have good friends that I highly respect, much more educated and intelligent than I am. And they have a completely, totally different viewpoint on this than I do. Matter of fact, they've written books about the subject. Pretty good books, very interesting. The fact is, I disagree with them. They're over here, I'm 180 degrees off from what they believe. So anyway, I'm gonna give you what I believe and why. Here's one of those things, nobody's saved or unsaved because of what they believe about this, what we're going to look at. However, I still think it's important that we apply the principles of investigation when we look at these things, and that we just look at what the Bible says, not what we want to read into it or read stuff in because there may be something we don't really understand that well. You may have a different viewpoint than I do on this, and that's fine. It really is. Because the other side has some pretty valid points to back up their side. It came to pass when men, I've highlighted that because key word, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. This is the key phrase in this whole discussion that we should consider. This is the core of the whole problem. The whole issue is that they took them wives of all which they chose. So, here's one of the things we're going to look at. We're probably not going to come to a hard and fast conclusion on this in the short study tonight, but I'm going to tell you what I believe. Okay. Here's it basically in a nutshell. We had Adam, and then we had Seth. Well, let's see. We had Cain, and we had Seth. All right. Cain's descendants went this way, and Seth had his line of descendants. We know Cain was evil. He started this whole thing of revenge and violence and so forth. We know because we read an account of some of his descendants down the line. They kind of followed up that same thing. So Cain was going in one direction. Seth was going in another direction. Seth's line was the righteous line that the prophecy God had given back here remember when he told Adam, okay, because of what you've done, the ground is cursed, you can eat bread by the sweat of your brow and so forth. Eve, multiply your conception and so forth like that, and sorrow and childbirth. To the serpent he said, you're going to eat dirt and basically so forth, but her seed will bruise your head and you'll bruise his heel and so forth. Well, that was a prophecy that through Seth's line, eventually the Savior, the Redeemer, would come. And God would redeem mankind through Seth's line. So here's the thing. Seth's line and Cain's line were not supposed to intermarry. They were supposed to stay separate because this line was corrupt and this line was not. So that's what's going on here. Now I'm going to tell you, here's what I believe. Because number one, it says it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth. And it says the sons of God. My contention is that sons of God means Seth's descendants. It doesn't mean fallen angels. Now, here in a second, we'll get to why, the belief is that, these were fallen angels, or the Nephilim. You've probably heard that name. The other contention is that these sons of God, and this is based on one verse in the Bible, Job 38:7, which says, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy in creation. That this refers to angels. Well, okay. If at any time sons of God ever referred to angels, it couldn't here because we're talking about fallen angels, if this is the case. And number one, fallen angels are servants of Satan. They're following Satan. They would not be referred to as sons of God, number one. All right. And here's why I believe my point that God intended for those two lines of descendants to stay separate is because it says they took them wives of all which they chose. If this wasn't something they were not supposed to have done, it wouldn't be in there, So this tells us why this happened. This is the key thing that causes the problem there. They intermarried and they weren't supposed to. Plus, do you remember that Moses back here in chapter 2 or 3, where Moses had put his commentary in there, which also was, pretty much universal principle. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, cling to his wife, singular, and they two shall be, one flesh, and so forth. And I know that later on down the road in the Bible we find men having a lot of wives and stuff like that. They weren't condemned for that. There are a lot of reasons, cultural reasons and so forth. We're not going to argue that point, except that we need to also notice every time in the Bible where a guy had a bunch of wives or more than one wife, it always caused problems, God used it for used it to bring about His will, but it still always caused problems. All right, let's look at some more. So who are the sons of God? Are they fallen angels? Are they descendants of Seth? Are they space aliens? Some people believe that. Space aliens. Or the Nephilim. Let's look here. They weren't supposed to intermarry with pagan people. Neither was Israel later on. And what I'm using here, some verses to illustrate this as, again, kind of like the blessings being passed down. This is a universal principle among God's people, Israel, and, as we'll see, also He intends for those of us today in the body of Christ, in the dispensation of grace, to observe the same principle. Doesn't apply to pagan people. They're, under Satan's power anyway. Doesn't matter. So let's look here in Numbers 25. Israel abode in Shittim. I like being in Bible study because you can say words like that. You can't say that in church, Oh, you get feathers ruffled. The preacher said a word like that in church. And the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. So you can see here what they did. I mean, they hadn't been out of Egypt all that long. They're crossing the desert, trying to go into the promised land. And this was all the deal. You remember Balaam and Balaam's ass that talked to him and all those kind of things, and all he was trying to, get Israel to sin and all those kind of things. Well, what he did was he arranged for them to come in contact with these daughters of Moab, sent them in there to corrupt the people, to defile the people, see? And they called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods, and the people did eat and bowed down to their gods. And Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. Remember what happened when we were going through the cycles of judgment? Every time the Lord was provoked to anger, here comes another cycle of judgment about to start. So, back here we can see a classic example of what they were not supposed to do. They weren't supposed to marry into or join themselves with the women of pagan peoples. Because they did, this is what was going to happen. You remember Solomon? Remember what happened to Solomon? in his later years, because of the pagan women he had married, he built temples and altars unto those pagan gods, and he himself went out there and made sacrifices to those pagan gods because he had married pagan women. God didn't intend for him to do that. Also in Ezra, they continue to do this. Even here in Ezra, they've come back, or they're coming back out of captivity, back into the land, going back to rebuild Jerusalem and so forth. So they're in that 5th cycle of judgment, but they've come out of captivity. And when Ezra the priest gets back there and he's trying to get things straightened out in Jerusalem, he finds this. Somebody comes to him and reports, for they have taken of their daughters for themselves, talking about pagan people's daughters they've taken, and for their sons, so that the holy seed have mingled themselves with the people of those lands. Yea, the hand of the princes and rulers hath been chief in this trespass. So the leaders were doing that as bad as anybody else, taking pagan wives, pagan women, and marrying them, and so forth. So it's interesting if you go and read in Ezra and what he did. He tore his clothes and put ashes on his head and prayed and so forth like that. And he didn't, that's not all he did. He applied, walk softly and carry a big stick. I mean, he took action. And I think he had some of them killed, as a matter of fact. So, principle illustrated here, God does not want his people mixing with pagan peoples. Now, this even applies to us, to the body of Christ today. Paul instructs the Corinthians. Now, the Corinthians, we'll admit, they were having some problems. They had some issues that needed to be straightened out. So there are reasons specifically why he wrote this to them, but still, the principle stands out to us, and we can understand this. He says, "Be not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness, and what communion hath light with darkness? What concord hath Christ with Belial, or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God, as God hath said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you, and will be a father unto you, and ye shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty." So instructions mainly, there are some specific things to the Corinthians. It is written for those reasons. We're not going to go into all those tonight. But we can see the principle here at the same thing. So it's kind of a universal principle that God wants either Israel during their program or the body of Christ in his program for us today to stay separated from pagan peoples. And, don't marry into unbelievers. It's just pretty much, it's not like some law, hard and fast, engraved in stone law we have to keep, but it's a principle and it's instruction for our growth and our understanding and our godliness that, we do observe. But anyway, I wanted to use these to illustrate this principle as it's kind of one of those, universal principles. Now, concerning the angels, if the Nephilim, I think I've got these slides a little bit out of order. I probably should have had the next one in Genesis next. But anyway, well, let's go ahead and talk about this. Okay, it says they chose for themselves wives or took wives of all they chose. Jesus said about angels, he said, "For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven." This is in response to the Sadducees came to him and they said, "Hey, there was this woman, and she had a husband. He died, leaving no children. So then there were 7 brothers there. Eventually, all 7 of them married her. None of them had children. In the resurrection, whose wife is she going to be?" And Jesus told us, "Well, you're mistaken, because number 1, you don't know the Scriptures. Number 2, you don't know the power of God." And he said, in the resurrection, they don't marry. They're not given in marriage, but as the angels of God in heaven. So a lot of interesting things about this, but we just want to use this to illustrate what Jesus said. Okay, if angels don't marry, then how could they, or why would they take wives of all they chose? It doesn't make sense. And listen, if there are clear, things that if they don't make sense, then there's a reason why they don't make sense. You're probably not right. So, the ones that believe these were fallen angels that took human women, they got a pretty good answer. They kind of have to go kind of around the world to answer this question. But anyway, so back to Genesis 6, verse 3. The Lord said, "My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years." Now, who did God say this to? He said it to the prophets. He probably said it to Lamech, maybe to Methuselah. He may have said it to Enoch. Probably Lamech, because from Lamech, I think, probably to the flood was about 120 years. Whenever he said it to Noah. He probably said this to Noah. He said, "My spirit shall not always strive with man, he is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. He said to the prophets who are already warning people of the coming judgment. We know that even, I think, over in Hebrews, it talks about Noah as being a preacher of righteousness, who preached to the people and warned them of the coming judgment. God also warns them of how long it would be before the judgment. This is the reason why we think it took Noah 120 years to build the ark. And also, there's no mention of fallen angels anywhere here in any of this. Only men. Now, with as specific as some of this is, some of these verses through here are, the only thing that if it concerned fallen angels, there would be something a little more specific in here to signify that. That's my reasoning on this. I think this is talking about men. I don't think that these giants, Genesis 6:4, it says there were giants, or Nephilim, in the earth in those days. And also after that, now the division here, see that semicolon right there, in those days, that's before the flood, and also after that, that's after the flood. We know that there were giants then, and there were giants after the flood. We know that the Bible tells us about giants. And we're going to look at some couple of things about giants here in a second. When the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Now, the whole Nephilim fallen angel controversy kind of stands on this verse when it talks about giants. Now, the word Nephilim is plural of Nephil, which according to Strong means a bully or a tyrant. I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but another kind of word I'm looking for. Anyway, usage of Nephilim, a variation, that's what I'm looking for, of Nephil is a fallen one. And so that's where they get that it's fallen angels. But the direct definition of this is like a bully or a tyrant. So now we know there were giants then, but then apparently everything grew bigger before the flood. We know that from the fossil record. We can dig them up and find things grew bigger back then. So it stands to reason people did too. But out of all of the races of people that were going to emerge out of Adam and Eve's DNA, races of giants were included in that. So there were physical giants, but also when the sons of God, who were Seth's descendants, came in unto the daughters of men, whether ones out of Seth's line or from Cain's line, they bare children, and them same became mighty men which are of old, men of renown. Now, I'm going to tell you one of the things we have happening here, and I think is a significant thing happening because we find it immediately begin to happen after the flood. This indicates a shift from the patriarchal rule to monarchical rule. That is, that people gain power over groups of people for their own purposes. Basically what was beginning to happen was you had, instead of the patriarch ruling the tribe or the people group as it was supposed to be handed down from father to son to father to son. Fathers teach their sons and pass that down. Well, you had these mighty men, these giants, these Nephilim, bullies, tyrants, who were beginning to emerge, and they would begin to gather power forces, armies to themselves, and they were beginning to gain power over groups of people for their own purposes. So you started to see kings arise. And when we get to those chapters after the flood, we'll see that emerge once again. But anyway, I wanted to make this point, and this also is one of the reasons why I believe this is talking about men. This is not talking about fallen angels and so forth like that. I think there's some things there that just don't make sense and don't bear out. So, giants. I've been reading a really good book. I recommend this book. You can get it on Kindle if you have a Kindle. It's called The Chronicles, or The Chronicle of the Ancient Britons, Britons. This is one of those books that's a left out history book. It gives pretty good details of the beginning of the British people, where they came from. In Greece, Troy, actually. Eventually wound up in Britain, settled there, and so forth. The reason this book is not accepted as a history book is because it gives accounts of giants and dragons, in which we know in ancient times they didn't have the word dinosaur. Any large reptile, they called it a dragon. That was the word for dinosaur before about 1840 something. So anyway, I recommend this book. You should read it. Very good book. The Chronicle of the Ancient Britons. And I can write it down for you later if you need me to. William Cooper is the author of that. Anyway, in this book, he gives a very interesting account of giants, even names some of the giants that lived in England, the British Isles, when hardly anybody else lived there. It says it was an island where giants dwelled, lived there. And as a matter of fact, when Brutus and his people went there to settle in Britain, some of the first battles they fought were with groups of giants. So, let's talk about giants. There were physical giants in the ancient time. Go ahead.
That's where I was going to go with Goliath.
Yeah. There were physical giants in the ancient times. Goliath, his brothers, Og, king of Bashan, are mentioned in the Bible. Og, king of Bashan, was probably about 9 or 10 feet tall. It says his bedstead was made of iron, 12 cubits long, and so forth. Goliath, we know, he was around 9 feet tall and so forth. And it gives a pretty good description of Goliath and so forth. Now, the terrain where they fought looks a little like that. Not exactly, but sort of. Goliath had brothers. And, one of them had 6 fingers on each hand or something like that. There are other races of giants mentioned in the Bible. The Rephaim, the Anakim, the Emim, and Zuzim. These are all tribes of giants. They were Canaanites, descended from Cain, and associated with the Philistines and so forth. Probably worked as mercenaries in the armies and things like that. Different things. Apparently, the giants pretty much spread out over the earth when the rest of the people did from the Tower of Babel. But nevertheless, many historical accounts of giants living in ancient times. Now here's a chart. I know you probably can't read a lot of this, but this is from Mount Blanco Fossil Museum, Joe Taylor's outfit. And these are skeletons of documented finds. Now, where the skeletons are, I don't know. Some of them have probably been lost and don't exist. Some of them are probably in some dusty basement in some museum somewhere that they don't want anybody to see because they don't want anybody to know that there were actually giants in the earth. This is present day man right here, about 6 feet tall. This is a 15-foot tall giant found in southeast Turkey. The dates are on here, but I can't read them on this, a little blurry. This one was found, Maximus Thrax, Caesar of Rome, in around the 3rd century. 8'6". 10'6" is Goliath, as we have in the Bible. 12 foot, Og, king of Bashan, in the Bible. 19'6". This was found in 1577 under something in France, I think, was where this was found. There's a 23-foot tall skeleton that was found in France in 1456. You know, back then, I guess they didn't think about it or didn't have any way to preserve bones and fossils. It's a shame that they didn't, because they probably dried out and crumbled, weren't preserved. There are a lot of accounts from the colonial days and the early settler days in America. You know, had all those mounds in the east, the mound builder culture. Well, a lot of those mounds, they dug into those mounds. And in a lot of those mounds, they found skeletons of like 8 feet, 9 feet tall skeletons with red hair, you know. Unfortunately, they didn't have PVA or anything to preserve them with, you know, and the skeletons weren't preserved. But anyway, 1613 in France, this 25'6" skeleton was found. And then this one, 36 foot, I think was 650. The Carthaginians, I can't read that, but anyway, supposedly this 36 foot, and there's supposed to be historical accounts of these skeletons being found, or the people that they knew of recorded that were that tall. So some giants, historical records. Now, in modern times, we have giant men. This guy here, this is Max Palmer. You may not have noticed, because it wasn't real obvious, when we went to the Creation Evidence Museum, back there in the back, where there were some display cases, there was a suit coat hanging up. You want to guess whose coat that was? This guy right here. Might even be that very coat. It's Max Palmer's. Max Palmer's like, I don't know, 8, 9 feet tall, you know, a giant. So anyway, one of his jackets is there in the museum. Modern day giant. We all know this guy, you know. Remember Andre the Giant. That's back when, you know, wrestling was good. It's all this fake stuff they had. And then these two guys. This was probably in India somewhere, I think. We got the guy here with his pith helmet on. These guys are pretty tall. So we know that even in modern times. Now, we're not going to mention any names because this is, you know, going on YouTube. And careful about names we mention, but you know there are a couple of guys living around here that you would consider giants, you know. One tall guy close by that's a farmer. There's another guy that lives that way. It's even bigger than him. I mean, that guy's a giant, you know, and his brother's almost as big. So, in modern times, there are giant men and giant women. So, normal sized woman here to call giant woman there. So let's move on. God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And you know why that was? Because they had these giant women walking around all over the place. No wonder their thoughts were evil continually. I couldn't resist that. I saw that. I was looking for giants. I couldn't resist that. Giant women. God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. See, we want to blame all this on the devil. We're still trying to blame somebody else, you know. And we want to think, well, it was because, you know, it was Satan's corruption, or the fallen angels came and they bred with human women and they caused this, you know, race of freaks, and that's where all of the Greek mythological gods came from, and there could be some truth in that. There could be some accuracy there, but we can't go in here and blame all this on the devil. No. It says the wickedness of man was great in the earth. No mention here of fallen angels anywhere. We can't put this blame off on somebody else. It was man's fault. So, and the thoughts of his heart were only evil continually. Now, Paul talked about this. You remember that passage over there in Romans chapter 1. And I'm not gonna read the whole thing. It's like verse 18 all the way through verse 32. I'm not gonna read all that, but I want to look at enough to kind of illustrate this. This verse right here. God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Paul goes into a little more detail. And if you've read this and maybe not made the connection back to that verse in Genesis, we can make that connection. Paul says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness." Now, it's interesting, Paul says it's revealing from heaven against all ungodliness. Do you remember what the core of Enoch's prophecy was? Behold, the Lord's coming with 10,000 of his saints to execute judgment on ungodliness and all the ungodly things they've said and ungodly things they've done and all that ungodliness. This is what, Paul's going back to that, to the beginning of where it started, the unrighteousness of men. He's not blaming the devil either. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. Now, we always want to apply this to us in our day, and it does apply. But let's take this and let's shift it back to those people before the flood, and let's apply it to them. That for them, that which might have been known of God was manifest in them. They still lived in the pre-flood world. They still had bodies that would live 960 years, and they had brains that had much higher capacity than ours do, and all those kind of things. And there were other things about the pre-flood world that demonstrated the power of God that they saw, so they were kind of without excuse. The invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. They were without excuse. This, still applies to Israel in this day when Paul's writing this, and also to people in our day. Invisible things of Him. We were talking about that thing out there in the Van Allen belt, that email you sent me the other day, invisible out there. They just made that discovery. What other things are invisible that we don't even know about, Amazing things that show the incredible, irreducible complexity of God's creation. Without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they glorified Him. And this was happening before the flood. This is a lot of why the imagination of their heart was continually evil. They glorified Him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like the corruptible man, and to birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. The core of idolatry and all. It had its start all the way back there in the flood, before the flood. So, Paul mentions these things. Now, back to Genesis chapter 6. It says, "And it repented the Lord that He had made man on the earth, and it grieved Him at His heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air. For it repenteth me that I have made them." Now, how the animal world fell under that corruption, we don't know. We know they did. We have fossil evidence that they did. You remember back there at the first, when God said, "I've given you every tree bearing seed, every herb of the field, all the plants for food, for you and for the animals." There was abundant plant food for every kind of animal. And apparently they weren't supposed to kill and eat each other. Well, we know that at some point they did begin to kill and eat each other. How do we know that? Because we have dinosaur bones in our possession with teeth marks, abundant, numerous teeth marks in those bones. And these bones are buried in sediment layers way beneath the earth, and so buried in the flood, Noah's flood, as we believe. So, all things became corrupt, and God said, "I'm going to destroy the earth." He's spelling out, this was going to be the judgment. Judgment is coming. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Now, Noah knew that judgment was coming. So next time, when we start to get into details about the flood and about the building of the ark and those kind of things, we'll see the account there. God speaking to Noah. Listen, when God spoke to Noah and told him, Noah, build an ark, build it this big, build it like this, wasn't a surprise to Noah because he knew judgment was coming. Now, interesting thing here, and this is one of those things we just read right by. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Okay. Key word here is found. Now, you don't find something unless you're doing what? You're looking for it. Noah knew that judgment was coming. And he knew that he would be caught up in that judgment as well unless God was merciful on him. He somehow, as much as he knew judgment was coming, he also knew God would be merciful. Only way I can say that he knew that was from those men before him who had walked with God. One of the things we're going to see about Noah, and we'll look at this next time, is that he also, like Enoch, walked with God. So he knew of God's mercy, and so he sought grace from the Lord, and he found it. He found it by faith. We know that. We can read about Noah there in Hebrews chapter 11. He found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So this is how. And also, in this, we see his father, Lamech's prophecy beginning to come true in Noah's life as he found grace in the eyes of the Lord. I think we're finished there tonight. Okay. Anybody got any questions or discussion? Any different viewpoints on the whole giants, Nephilim thing? You may know something about this I don't. So I'm always interested. Like I say, I'm not dogmatic about it. This is what I believe and why. But, I will fight about it.
How does a man get 36 feet tall?
Well,
I can understand 8, 9, maybe 10. 36?
Yeah, 36 feet tall. That's huge,
Usually not.
And I've read somewhere, it might be in Joe Taylor's book on giants, somewhere. Somebody that can really do math did the math on the exponential growth in strength factor of height. Okay, as height increases, and it wasn't like they just were tall like a beanpole. Their whole size increased too, and with that size, the strength that increased. This is one of the reasons why, from most of us young earth creation, literal Bible believers standpoint, we believe that a lot of the megalithic stone structures in the world were built by giants. Because, okay, somebody did the math on this. The exponential growth increase in size, which would equal a certain amount of strength. And you take a guy that's, say he was 20 feet tall, and how many times stronger he would be than a normal man. Like, say, normal man can lift, I don't know, 100 pounds, fairly can handle, about 100 pounds. That's pretty much max and so forth, depending on what kind of shape. An average guy handle about 7,500 pounds. Well, you take a guy that's 20 feet tall, and I don't know, he could lift like a couple of tons or something. So, you take these 10-ton blocks of stone, and you get 4 guys that are 18 to 20 feet tall and some kind of thing. They can get them, one on each corner and carry the thing wherever they want to go, and build these big structures and so forth. So there's a lot of reason to believe that, the giants built those things. Or it's a pretty good theory anyway. But as far as 36 feet tall, here's the thing that we have to remember. Even though there are accounts of these skeletons being found, unless there are bones that somebody can see and test and verify, their genuineness, we have to just kind of keep that in the category of a story, you know, because, you know, it's one of those things. If it's an artifact that doesn't have any provenance, you just can't go by it. You know, you can go on the internet, you can Google giant skeletons, YouTube and all this stuff. And you get all kind of pictures, these archaeological digs where these guys are out there, you know, and they're digging up these big giant skulls and big giants. Well, most of those are fake. In fact, all of them may be fake. They may not all be. But the fakes are done so well that it'd be hard to tell whether they were fake or not. Now, the people that don't believe the Bible and don't want to admit that there were giants in ancient times, you know, they're going to say, oh, they're fake. Just like, you know, the human footprints and all that kind of stuff. They're going to claim that they're fake. But, you know, it's possible, I guess. But you think 36 feet tall, you didn't really think, I mean, that would be like that tall building across the street. You know, that'd be probably that tall. Would you say that building to be about that tall? Probably 25, 30 feet maybe?
That's 15 foot from the floor to the ceiling here, 15, 18 foot.
Yeah, so it'd be twice as tall as, you know, I mean, it'd be big, you know. I mean, it would be a, you know, great big.
I doubt you get forced labor out of someone that size.
No, you wouldn't think so.
Cookies.
Well, that's the thing. You think about it. If you had a guy 36 feet tall, you think about how much that guy's going to eat. You know? Now, somebody, you know, if you could feed that guy enough to keep him from being hungry, then he'd do anything. You know, he would do things that you couldn't do. Plus, if he was 36 feet tall, then that means there were some other people that were 36 feet tall, 25 feet tall, and on. So he wasn't the only one. So, you know, and even giants. Matter of fact, in this book I've been reading, the Chronicle of the Early Britons, it gives an account of this one of the guys that came to England, and apparently was one of those ancient, like Conan type warriors, you know, had this big battle axe, and he went around fighting giants. That's what he loved to do, is fight giants. And he had this big battle axe, and it gives accounts of, you know, him in battle and all that kind of stuff. So even though they were big, they still had weaknesses, you know, and so you might not get the 36-foot guy to work for you, but you could get the 20-foot tall guy to work for you, you know.
They may have been just vegetarians too.
Yeah.
Because that'd be plentiful maybe during that time or something.
Yeah.
You know, because like the dinosaurs, you know, they were carnivorous and vegetarian.
Apparently so.
Yeah,
I mean,
but you
they
could
ate
eat
each other.
little on either and still
Yeah.
get that.
Yeah.
Like a gorilla,
Mm-hmm.
you know, nowadays I think it's 3 to 5 times stronger than man. You know, and he's not.
I read a deal here a while back,
Somewhere around there, isn't he?
and it was something in a creation evidence publication. Something it was talking about you know, they want to go. The evolutionists want to go on about how that humans and chimps have so close a DNA ratio and all this kind of stuff. They don't ever talk about the differences in the DNA ratio. Anyway, the illustration it said you take an adult chimpanzee and Mike Tyson and lock them in a room together, the chimp's walking out. And he's not even going to have many bruises. Put them in a room, fight to the death, the chimp's coming out of there without a scratch, you know. That's because they're incredibly strong, you know, way stronger than we are. And then you take a gorilla, you know, like a 500-600 pound gorilla, man, he'd tear you to shreds, you know.
Stronger.
Yeah.
At least. That's
Yeah, but then that's the way they're made. That's, you know, they're physically made of. And apparently, the Neanderthal people, even though they were not knuckle-dragging cavemen, they were an intelligent, skilled, sophisticated race of people. But apparently, they were a very strong, robust people, and they, you know, their skeletons, which we have complete Neanderthal skeletons, very, you know, heavy bones and things like that. So they were probably incredibly strong people.
Maybe that 36-foot guy was where the marks from the dinosaur bones come from.
It might have been. It might be human teeth chewing on those dinosaurs. Hey, it's not impossible. You know, it's not impossible.
We eat cows.
Yeah, so they probably
Most
did.
of us do.
I mean, you figure a giant, a guy who's even 25 feet tall, especially 36 feet tall. I mean, can you imagine how much it took to feed that guy, you know? I mean, I don't know how you can keep him fed. That's probably why their mammoths and all that stuff went extinct. Giants. Anyway. All right, anything else before we close now? All right, everybody stay warm as you go home and be careful on the road. Let's pray.